Good morning, church. How are we doing today? It's good to see all of you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here in the South, and I love coming here. You guys are very hospitable, and it is fun to be. This is a fun group when you come in. Everyone's glad to see one another. Everybody knows one another, and it really is a joy to be here. I was asked to come here and talk about romance today, and so. Our topic today is we're going to be talking a little bit about love and romance and, how to build a healthy culture that supports romantic relationships and helps build healthy romantic relationships. And the principles today, I'm going to be honest, they're true for all relationships, not just romantic relationships. But the thing about romantic relationships that's different than all other relationships is that they're the ones that have the potential for legacy. Families are born out of romantic relationships, generations of families. And so we're honing in on that today. And that's important because some of us are trying to build romantic relationships. Some of us are trying to help people build romantic relationships. And what's important is that we have a culture, in the entire body that helps build really healthy relationships with one another that are one day going to turn into families. But before we address the nuances of this somewhat perilous topic as a speaker, I want to point to some intrinsic designs in us as a human. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. There was a day last spring, my third son Gus and I, we were at the gym together, and it was a little bit later at night, and there's only like me and 7 guys and my son in there. And so him and I were working out, and we have this device in this gym, and it's a vertical height measurer, okay? And so it measures your ability to jump vertically. And all it is a tall pole, and it's got these tags on it, and you try and hit these tags. And then, you take your height minus what you hit, and then that's your vertical, all right? And so we were sitting there, and my son had said, do you think I could hit, this height? And I was like, nope, I don't. And so we went over there, and he jumped up, and he just about got it, all right? And so I'm laughing as he's doing this, and then he tries again, and he misses again, all right? And now I'm really laughing. And here's what's funny, is now all of a sudden all the guys that were in the gym, they all start gravitating over here, and they're all kind of staying in there. So Gus jumps up again, and he almost gets it, and I'm on the ground now. And so one of the other guys goes, can I try? And I was like, yeah, go. And so 7 of us, strangers who never knew each other, we're all jumping up and trying to jump as high as we can, and we are bonding over this, all right? And there's nothing deep about this. There's nothing beyond the idea that it's just 7 guys trying to jump as high as they can, making fun of each other when we can't do it, and congratulating one another when we can do it. And we had formed, within 10 minutes, a village. All right? And I thought about this later. I was like, and this is what I think about sometimes. If armed invaders had tried to come to that gym right there, I'm positive the 7 of us could have taken them. We would have come up with the plan. We would have, because we had the experience of jumping up and trying to hit that, there's an oath. We're going to risk our lives for one another, and we're going to take out these villains together. All right? All right, and the reason I'm talking about this is this is how wired we are for connection. It does not take a whole lot for us to want to be together, to us want to connect. We invent ways, like just jumping up as high as we can, to find mechanisms for us to connect with one another. We're designed this way. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 says this, then God said, let us, and that's important, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created mankind in his image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. One of the first things that is mentioned in the Bible is that God himself is relational in nature. All right? So this points to the idea that God is plural. Let us make man in our image. So right from the get-go, one of the first things that we see about God is that he's not singular in nature. Somehow he is plural in nature. All right? And the reason why that is that points to the fact that he is in close relationship with himself right from the get-go. His very nature is relational in how he is, all right? And we don't really, it doesn't explain it. I mean, it would be great if, like, at some point in Genesis, it said, by the way, when it says, let us make man in our image, this is what that means. But it doesn't. All we know is that God is plural in nature, and he's in perfect harmony with himself. And then he goes on to make a creation with which he can have a relationship with. All right? Furthermore, he says, let us make this creation in our image. So God himself is relational. He makes creation in his image. Therefore, that creation is also relational in its very nature. All right? We are wired to connect. We are biologically made for connection. We'll get more into that. But that's important because that's important to what we're going to talk about today. Trying to have relationships with one another, whether they're romantic or not, whether these are friendships, whether this is parental, our nature is to need to connect. It is how God made us, and to have healthy connections with all of that. Interestingly enough, though, most of our most major connections, we have no choice over. Like, we didn't get to choose mom, and we didn't get to choose dad. We didn't get to choose our stupid siblings. We didn't get to choose our aunt and uncle. You know what's crazy? You don't even get to choose, for the most part, you don't even get to choose your children. They just are. Like, they're here, and then that's what you got, all right? All right, and so most of our most important relationships, we have no choice over. We just have to learn to love them. And you know what? And here's what's crazy. We accept it. like, well, that's the way the world is, and so I am going to choose to love these people that God put in my life. I had no option. There was no vote, anything like that. God never came to me and said, how would you like your parents to be? Nope, this is what you got. Learn to love it, all right? And we accept all of that, all right? So we don't get to choose most of our relationships. The person, at least in the Western world, that you do get to choose is your spouse. Which is why it's startling to me, the casualness or the thoughtlessness. I always do that with thoughtlessness. It's just oneness, okay? It's not minus twice, just minus once, all right? With which so many people approach the way they choose, the way they court, the way they decide upon the person they're going to spend the rest of their life with. And to further underscore this strangeness is a growing sentiment that this is an arena of life that the church should be increasingly silent upon. You know, for some people, the church is supposed to weigh in on the heavy, complex, global issues that plague humanity. And yet, it's also expected to remain quiet about the types of personal choices, like this one, that is often a precursor to our greatest problems in those global dynamics and national dynamics. All right? The relationships between the health of a society and the strength of that society's family structure is really difficult to measure, admittedly, all right? There are so many cultures all over the world that do family so differently. In this room alone, people will do family differently, you know? And so the way that households vary from one household to another is great. And yet, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any anthropologist or serious historian that wouldn't admit that the family structure is one of the most important building blocks of all civilizations. You know, there was a period in the last 100 years or so when there was a thought that perhaps well-resourced entities, like perhaps a government, could do a better job raising healthy kids than their biological families could, who were often largely uneducated. And that notion has now been summarily disproven. All right? The bond between even a newborn and their mother is something that is so strong that when it's broken through separation, irreparable harm is not unexpected. The attachment between children and family is something that cannot be simulated by artificial structures, organizations, or any activity outside of the family. The understanding that neuroscientists, that psychologists, and sociologists have gleaned in this subject over the last 30 years seems to just be the tip of the iceberg. And the point I want to be clear upon is that family is not something that's a simple social construct. It seems to be a hardwired biological need. All right? As though we were in fact created for familial connection. And so when we extend that fact further, it's no wonder that many historians have pointed to the fact that when the family structure is strong, the community is strong. All right? And when the family disintegrates in any kind of widespread way, then societies are weakened and become at risk. You guys with me? Yeah. So, with all of that, let's just assume that all of that's true. Okay, I didn't make that up, nor did I do the studies, though. Okay, these are just this is information that you can easily find out there, and you can disagree with it or not. But let's just assume it's true for a second. And if all of that is true, one would think, assuming the basic truth of all that, there would be more honest criticism and examinations of how we build family, beginning with the process of how we build our romantic relationships. The fact that 50% of all marriages end in divorce in the United States, and that the current average age of a person getting divorced is 30 years old, should be absolutely alarming to a society that's built on family. All right, we should be questioning. You would think that culture would begin questioning all the ways that it's doing its business as it pertains to romantic engagement. Imitating the wider world, or even desiring to imitate the wider world and how it builds its relationships romantically, is statistically insane at this point. But let's not be mistaken. The way that we date, okay, from the very beginning, the way that we begin to pursue a person that we have chemistry with or that we have a romantic interest in, is usually the way that our family is also going to end up. The process that we have in pursuing romantic engagement follows all the way through the way that you build family for the most part. And it's this statement that undergirds the way that we as a faith community should be thinking about the culture that we want to build around healthy romantic relationships. The way you date will largely determine what goes on in your marriage and your family. Now, I think it needs to go without saying that you don't need to be in a romantic relationship ever in your life to have a very fulfilling life. Okay, that's like a Western thing, that you have to be married to have a full life. You don't. You can have a very fulfilling, meaningful, awesome life without ever getting married at all. I want to make that clear. Now, I also want to make one other thing clear. If you are married right now, and as you hear some of what I'm saying, and let's just say that you did not follow this, some of the biblical, instructions, we'll say, in building a romantic relationship with the person that you've now been married to for 30 years, okay? That doesn't mean that your marriage stinks right now, okay? It also doesn't mean that things cannot change in any marriage, all right? So I just want to make sure that no one is interpreting what I'm saying in a way that I don't intend, okay? It needs to go without saying, again, you don't need to be married to be happy. But to be honest, addressing a topic like romance is somewhat clunky on a Sunday morning because it's not straightforward. It's an issue addressed most appropriately through the application of wisdom, not rules, okay? And wisdom is something that we use for the gray areas of life, not for the black and white areas of life. All right, so you have to apply wisdom to the idea of building romantic relationships. I've spent a lot of time trying to framework this discussion so that what I say isn't easily dismissed as irrelevant. The concept of dating is challenging to address from a Christian worldview because the Bible says nothing about dating. All right, the first time the concept of dating is written in any sort of literature that we can find is in 1896 in a Chicago newspaper. All right, and the way that the word was used is that, it used to be that if you were courting a young woman, you would go to her family's house and you would have like a chaperoned tea time or coffee time. So you would go over to their house and you would set up an appointment to have a time with the young woman and her mom. All right, and you would set a date for when that time would take place. All right, and so that was the idea of dating in its inception, at least written in a newspaper in Chicago in 1896. There's no dating in the Bible. We're not going to find any specific examples of it, all right? But what we do find in the Bible is timeless wisdom regarding relationships in general. So our task as a faith community is to take the ancient biblical wisdom about relationships and apply it to a very modern and wildly flawed apparatus called dating, okay? So my goal this morning is to describe a biblically wise and healthy culture of dating that we as a faith community can teach, that we can use to help form healthy relationships. Go ahead and turn to Luke 14. And so I think the first thing I would say to you about the type of dating culture a faith community should try to form is that it shouldn't be a culture built with the primary goal of teaching people not to sin. All right, so the role of any sort of dating culture within a faith community, its primary goal shouldn't be, let's make sure no one sins. Okay, that's a very short-term, short-thinking way to build any culture. Instead, it ought to be a culture that teaches and prepares people for a more intimate and lasting relational commitment. That's what the culture should do. It should be training people how to be in a committed and intimate relationship for a lifetime. All right? If we apply the Bible to modern dating, then its culture ought to be preparing people for future relationships, especially marriage. Specifically, our dating culture, based on biblical wisdom, ought to teach several things in its practical application. And we're going to talk about 4 of them today. First of all, how to be God-centered in a relationship. Secondly, how to be selfless in a relationship. Third, how to have self-control in a relationship. And lastly, how to be community-oriented in a relationship. So let's begin at looking at what Jesus taught about priority within our most important relationships in Luke 14. Verse 25 of Luke 14 says this: large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. This would have been a bit jarring thing to hear from a Jewish audience. An audience that is living in a Middle Eastern world where family is your identity. Like your personality is not your identity. Your family is your identity. What your family does, what your family's reputation within a community, that is your identity. Okay? And so Jesus is now saying your family identity is not the most important thing. The most important thing is your identity in me. If you want to follow me, then your identity in me has to be the greatest priority in your life. All right? Does that make sense, guys? And so when people heard this would have been controversial. To us, we've read this scripture so many times. This is no longer controversial. We read it in very convenient ways so we can make it less controversial, okay? But in essence, Jesus is saying, if you're going to follow me, I have to be your first priority in every institution, in anything that you do. Jesus expected that each of our relationships, and especially within our most important ones, that he is our priority. All right, Jesus is more important, he says, than your mom and dad, than your brothers and sisters, than your own life, certainly than your wife. Okay, Jesus has to be the central fixture in all of those relationships. Thus, we ought to have a dating culture that is Jesus-centric. All right, we're both people who are interested in one another, who are building a romantic engagement, put Jesus as their first priority in life. All right, not simply emotionally or intellectually, but through trusting and submitting to his lordship. All right, now that seems simple, right? But it should be demonstrated by a life that shows this to be true. All right, you cannot just sing a song about Jesus and claim that he is the most central part of your life. All right, everybody should be able to look at your life and go, okay, the priority of this person's life is Jesus. All right, and then you have to find another person who makes the priority of their life Jesus, and it's something that's easy to recognize for everybody. All right, does that make sense, guys? And so I think the key to this is, don't date a fraud then. okay? Like, don't date someone that just says Jesus is their Lord, but really isn't. And furthermore, don't project your greatest hope into reality. All right, so, we all know how it is. Like, everybody who's married, everybody who's not married, when you have an interest in someone, it's like brainwashing, okay? Like, you no longer see reality as it is, okay? It's very easy to trick yourself into a lot of things. Someone, you tell, I've met this person, they are amazing, they're so funny, they like me, and then the question is, is Jesus, do they follow Jesus? Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've gone to church before, and all of a sudden now, that you are trying to prove it in some retroactive fashion. All right, and you're on the defense about it, and you don't want to talk about it. You may not even want anybody to talk to that person because you're trying now to protect an image that you've created in your mind rather than a reality that is supposed to be true. All right, does that make sense, guys? So don't trick yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to others, all right? And the reason for this, first of all, is one, you're supposed to give glory to God with your life, all right? So honesty in all of this should be important. But secondly, you're not going to have a good marriage with someone that doesn't make Jesus the Lord of their lives. You might have a great dating relationship all the way up to marriage. It could be a ton of fun. It could be like they're your biggest fan. All of that ends at some point if Jesus is not the Lord of their life. All right? And so don't be duped by the movies. Don't be duped by the songs. Trust God. You have to have someone who makes Jesus the center of their life. Amen? All right, secondly, a wise dating culture that we build as a fellowship should teach selflessness in the individual and in the relationship. Cruciform living, as described in the verse that we just read in Luke 14, places others above yourself. And sacrificial decision-making is an aspect to following Jesus that he expresses over and over as integral within the gospel. All right? In respect to marriage, if there is no selflessness that is a regular part of the relationship, then it becomes a very fractured household. Anybody that's been happily married for decades will tell you one of the only reasons why there is happiness is because both parties involved have agreed to, on a consistent basis, act selflessly with one another. They have agreed that because they're going to follow Jesus, they're going to put this other person's needs above their own every day. All right, and to do it consistently. When one person does that in a marriage, one person's happy in the marriage. All right, and it's not the person that's being selfless usually. It's the person that's clued out, all right? So let's just say you marry someone that you are in love with. We're not going to question love. We're not going to question the feelings or the chemistry or anything like that. But if you marry someone that is not Jesus-centric, then they're also not going to be selflessly motivated for the rest of their life because they won't have a Jesus conviction about it. You will then be signing up for a life of selflessness towards that person who will never reciprocate it to you when they don't feel like it. All right? That is a recipe for a fractured type of household. So as a community, we should be intent on having dating cultures that teach selflessness from the very beginning of courtship. You know who it's easy to be selfless with? Like the easiest person in the world to be selfless with? The person you're attracted to. Like if you are attracted to someone and they say to you, hey, I got to go to the airport at 4 a.m. next week. Would you be willing to take me? Yeah, absolutely. And I'll bring breakfast, and you'll stay up all night just so you don't sleep through the alarm for the person you're attracted to. The person you're attracted to, if they've got a big load and they're going out to the car, you're like, oh, let me take all of that. And you're going to carry their stuff for them. You will help them move. Like you will go rent your own pickup truck to help them move to a new apartment if you're attracted to them, all right? But so what? People in the world do that. People in the world do that. When you are looking for a romantic relationship, look to see how they treat the people they're not attracted to. What is their relationship with selflessness to the people they're not attracted to? do they help that person move? You know, one of the things I love about the YoPro group me is I can count every week on someone asking for a ride to the airport. Like, some people will travel out of without any plans for a ride to get home from the airport on the way back. And they completely rely upon the travel department that is the YoPros in the Denver church to get them from one place to another, okay? All right? And that's good. That type of selflessness is good. Look for the people that do it all the time. That's a potential spouse right there. Look for the person who's always helping everybody else move. That's a great potential spouse right there. One of my best friend's wives, she told me that one of the biggest reasons that she started dating him was that he made time for single women in the church that never went on dates and that no one took the time to encourage. She saw this man get big groups of people together to go out and encourage the single women who are oftentimes not getting attention, because he wanted to make sure that they understood that they are cherished and they are loved and they are protected and that they have male relationships that are looking out for them. All right? And she said that was the biggest motivator for me dating this man. Because I knew that one day I was going to be a person in his life that was going to be someone he wasn't attracted to. All right, and let me explain what I mean by that. All right, when you're dating, the other person's always beautiful. Like all of their little quirks, they're adorable. You know, all the things that they do, it's just like, oh, that's so interesting that they do that. And then like 12 years later, you're like, who are you? You are crazy. Like all of those little adorable traits become the greatest irritants. You're like, what? Why do you do that? Why are you like this? And pretty soon, like, and this is normal, this isn't bad, but, when you're dating, you're always getting dressed up for one another, you're looking your best, and then, once there's a lot of security, it's not always true, right? Like, some of that pressure goes away. And one day you wake up, and, I mean, not my wife, but other wives, but some days you wake up and you're like, oh, okay, hi. You want some coffee? And so you want to be married to someone who in those moments when you're not attractive, when you're not easy to be around, when you're needy, when you're irritating and annoying, they're still selfless. You can tell that before you get married for 10 years. Look at how they treat people before you're married. Do they help set up the sound? Do they help break down the chairs? Do they sign up for service projects? Are they helping around? Are they giving their time to people who can't do anything for them? All right, that's the type of person you should be looking for. All right, does that make sense? So if you want to be an attractive option for marriage, you should be doing those things. You should be doing the dirty work. And then what you do is like you do the dirty work, and of course no one like loves doing the dirty work, but you know what you do? You learn to love it. You teach yourself to love it. You teach yourself to be joyful. That is spousal training right there. All right? And not just selfless as individuals. So we're talking about look for a selfless individual, but then you should have a selfless relationship as well. If you're going to date someone, you should be looking at your relationship as a place to be selfless. Making both people see the relationship as a way to help others. Relationship isn't just that you can focus on one another, but they should be something that can meet the needs of the community around them. We want our families and our friendships and our marriages to be outward facing and ready to help the world around us, not just focus upon our own internal desires and needs. Thus, we should be teaching a dating culture that has an expectation of selflessness in the individuals and as the relationship, okay? Next, and similar to selflessness, is that we need a culture of dating that is teaching self-control and principles that expect and teach from the earliest moments of a dating relationship self-control. Proverbs 25:28 says this, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Essentially, An individual or a relationship that lacks self-control invites destruction, the way that a wealthy city without walls invites destruction in the ancient world. When building a romantic relationship, it must have as one of its foundations self-control. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And we're going to forego any examples about immorality and purity, all right? Those aren't gray issues. Those are black and white issues. All right? The Bible is very clear that when building a relationship, there should be absolutely no immorality and no impurity. Those are inarguable if you're following Jesus. So we don't really need to talk about them. If this is a part of a dating relationship, then you are living as a hypocrite, and we know what Jesus has to say about hypocrites. So we're not going to spend any time with that because that's not nuanced. That's very clear. But let's talk about the nuanced aspects of self-control, okay? I mean something more subtle. How much time do you spend together? Talk on the phone. What do you say to one another when no one is around when you're building a dating relationship? When you're building a relationship that you care about, these things absolutely should matter because you're not married. You have no binding commitment to one another. And there are many things said and unsaid that should be reserved for the binding relationship of marriage alone. Any person that is making over-the-top verbal pledges, affirmations, gestures of dramatic, emotional, and romantic significance, that's often a person that lacks internal self-control in their speech and in their emotion. And if they lack that right now, they're absolutely going to lack it in marriage. And the words that now are so filled with, just dripping with romantic sentiment, are sweet to the point of making your friends want to puke, you know? All of that, if it is unexamined and it is expressed without any modicum of self-control, it might be sweet now, but what happens later when they feel disdain towards you? Do you think all of a sudden at that point they're going to practice self-control? What about when they're angry? Do they all of a sudden learn self-control in that arena? What about when they're wrathful or dismissive? If they don't have self-control from the beginning, they're not going to have self-control later. The point is that without learning self-control now, they're not going to have it in a marriage relationship. And some of the things that they will say and do will scar terribly. Not just you, but perhaps your future children. You know, Megan and I, we've always, there's a couple in rules of engagement with communication between my wife and I. There's things we both agreed we will never say. It will never come out of our mouth. Because once something comes out of your mouth, you can never unhear it. It doesn't matter how much the other person says, I don't mean that, I was just angry. It's out now. It's out, it's in your head, and it's in your heart, and the person will always wonder if that came not from a place of emotion, but from a place of truth. All right, and a person that's beginning a dating relationship that exhibits no self-control in speech will not exhibit it later in marriage. Does that make sense, guys? You wouldn't want to marry someone that has no self-control in finances, for instance. All right, let's say you really connect with someone and you have great conversation, and then you find out they've got a rampant gambling problem. Okay, they're $300,000 in debt, no sign of repentance anywhere. They just keep going. All right, you would never go, oh, this is someone that I could marry. All right, because their debt becomes your debt, first of all. And now you will have to carry the burden of their lack of self-control. Furthermore, they've done nothing to exhibit that they're going to have self-control later. You would not marry that person, right? And that's an obvious example, but the same thing goes with speech and all action. All right, someone that is not willing to have their self-control challenged or examined is not someone you should want to be with. All right? Because in marriage, you're both going to have to submit at different times. You're going to be in fights, and you're going to have someone else come into your marriage, and they're going to, you're both are going to be discipled. And you're going to have to be with someone that will submit, because you're going to submit. My wife and I have walked into many D times, with the Jacobs, with the Kims, with the Finks, with the Arnesons, and sometimes when you walk in, people are like, "How are you guys doing?" And we'll just be like, "We're not doing good. We're fighting about this." And then here's the thing. I know it doesn't even occur to me that Megan wouldn't submit to the discipling that she's going to get in that moment. I know that she's going to listen to the wisdom of elders. And she knows that I will as well. But if you're with someone that doesn't exhibit self-control, they're not going to listen. They're going to do what they want to do. All right? So the time that you spend together, what you say, how much time you talk, all of that needs to exhibit some amount of self-control. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Song of Solomon. And here's another aspect to the wisdom of self-control in a dating culture. You know, there's not going to be a point in life when it comes to romance where you're fully content. All right, so I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're single, but you want to be you want to have a romantic interest. All right, like you want to meet somebody. All right, and so like you could be generally content, but you want to be somewhere else, right? And then let's say you're single, but you do have a romantic interest. Oh, now you've got your romantic interest. Are you content? No, you're not. Because now you'd like to be in a dating relationship with that person you have a romantic interest in. And then lo and behold, let's say you're now in an exclusive dating relationship with this person that you have a romantic interest in. Certainly at this point, you will find yourself contented. You will not, okay? Because at that point, now you're looking for, is this the person I can marry? I would like to be engaged to this person. And now you're pushing for that. And then finally, once you're engaged and you have a ring on your finger, you have a promise of a wedding, are you content at that point? Of course not. You will not be content until the wedding and the ceremony is as perfect as possible. And then once you've had your wedding, once you have the ceremony, if you have gone through that whole timeline and you have not exhibited self-control, once you're married, you're going to want to be right back to being a single person. Because your marriage will be very fractured and it will be unhappy. Does that make sense, guys? Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 7 says this. Young women of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and the wild does of the field. I'm not going to be able to explain that part right there. I don't know. I'm not sure why she doesn't say, I charge you by the word of God or by the hand of God. Somehow the gazelles and the does have some authority in this area, okay? But by the gazelles and the wild does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. You know, that says that 3 different times in the Song of Solomon. I don't know if it's always because of the gazelles and the does, but 3 different times it says, do not awaken love until the appropriate time. The wisdom in this verse is that there has to be a cadence and there has to be a pace to a relationship. Cadence and pace require so much self-control. You know, my wife and I, we dated for 4 years before we were married. I tried to convince her to run away with me all the time. Like when we first started dating, I was like, you drop out of college, I drop out of college, let's go travel the world together. You know, like let's live the dream. Our love will keep us fed, you know. Like I believed it. I was like, we're going to be fine. As long as we got each other, we're fine. You know, and then we became Christians in the middle of our relationship and, you know, everything changed. And so at that point, you know, you couldn't really elope at that point and have the friendship of the fellowship at that point. And so what I was trying to do was get us on the mission field. Because what I thought is, if they send us on the mission field, they're going to want to have us get married before we go out on the mission field. And so I signed up for every mission team there was with the hope that, and I wanted to go on the mission team too. I mean, I wanted to do both. But there is a cadence and there is a pace to building a healthy relationship. The pace of a romantic relationship is dictated by so many factors as well. Your feelings are just one of the factors of the pace of a relationship. Your feelings should not, though, dictate the pace of the relationship. Your age matters. Your maturity matters. And I don't mean your maturity determined by you. I mean your maturity determined by other people. You know, if you're dating and you think you're mature, you're probably deceived. You should probably let someone else determine whether or not you're mature. Go up to a person who you really truly believe is wise, not your best friend, but the person who you truly believe is wise, and ask them, can we have a conversation about my maturity and where you think it is right now? All right? And that's a very vulnerable thing to do, right? And you ask them, do you think my maturity level, do you think I'm ready to be a husband? And let them answer that question for you. You don't have to believe them, but you should ask. You should wrestle over what these people say. Does that make sense? Your life stage matters. Like, do you work? Do you have a full-time job? Are you able to take care of a family? That matters. Your walk with God absolutely matters. Are you faithful? Are you sacrificial? Do you put Jesus first? Do you help other people? That matters as well to the cadence and the pace of your relationship. To awaken the torrent of romance and love without regard to pace is foolishness. And it's a foolishness that will later continue into your marriage and family. Finally, guys, a healthy dating culture should emphasize the need for community in the relationship. I graduated from UMass Amherst, and we had the tallest brick structure in the country it was our library when we were there, until the University of Texas spitefully built theirs 1 story taller. But that was the library. And in the library on the I think it was the 17th floor was the old theology department, all right? And when I went there, they didn't have a theology department, but they had all the books. I used to go up there and study because no one else was ever there. And I remember one time I was going through all these books, and I came across a whole row of like leather-bound, they looked like ledgers. And I pulled them out, and they were the minutes from like 1901 of the local Presbyterian church in Amherst. For the elders meetings, okay? So you would open up to a day, and it would say, this is what the elders talked about this day. And inevitably, in some of those ledgers, they would say, Mr. So-and-so and Miss So-and-so came today before the elders to ask their permission to get married. All right? And if the elders said yes, then they could get married. And if the elders said no, well, they couldn't get married in that church. All right? And so after a lot of discussion and meetings, we have now decided to implement this practice in the Denver Church of Christ. I'm just kidding. But But here's the thing. Now, some people, you may look at this and go, this is senseless. This is otherworldly to allow other people to determine whether or not you should get married, all right? But let me just say this, okay? Your relationship, all of your relationships affect the rest of us, all right? Your relationship affects the community for both good or bad. If you build a foolish romantic relationship, you are not Jesus-centered, you're not selfless, you don't listen to anyone, and then you end up getting married, then your marriage is going to be a disaster likely, and then you're going to need support. And that affects me, okay? That affects Greg, that affects all the mature people in here who are going to have to carry your sorry butts around for a while to help you with your marriage. Your bad marriage affects the rest of us, okay? And here's the thing, we're happy to help. This is a calling. We should be happy to help. But don't be foolish enough to think that your decisions don't affect everybody else. Because it does. I was reading a series of summations that pooled the result of about 125 studies on marriage and divorce. And one of the results of these studies was that it determined that each divorce in the U.S. costs the federal government and the state around $30,000 per divorce. There's a divorce every 40 seconds in this country. So during the course of this message, 40 people have gotten divorced in the U.S., costing everyone in this room $1.1 million, over $300 billion a year annually. And that's an expense paid for by everybody else. Here's another interesting fact. If you have a close friend, if your best friend gets divorced, then you are 147% more likely to become divorced yourself. If a friend of your best friend gets divorced, you're 33% more likely to get divorced yourself. Now, I'm not saying that bad relationships are necessarily contagious, but their negative impact is obviously communicable in some ways. All of this takes a heavy cost on community. So it makes perfect sense that community should have at some level an involvement in your relationship. So a good question to examine: in what way should the community be involved with my relationship in a biblically wise dating culture? Simply put, invite the wisdom and the faith of the community into your decision making, into your planning, into your boundary making in regard to the ways that you build your relationship. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. It's funny, there's 4 different versions of this. There's 3 different versions, but it's said 4 different times. Plans fail, nations fail, wars fail for lack of counsel. I personally think all 3 of those entities are involved in marriage at some level, okay? You ever met someone that has made like a terrible financial decision? Like they got a terrible car loan, like they just fell in love with the car and then they just made a stupid decision with the car loan. Or they put all of their savings into somebody called them up and said, I could double your money in 1 year. Or, they make some really dumb financial decision, okay? And we all know, had they just taken 5 minutes to ask someone intelligent in the financial realm, they would have avoided this decision. They wouldn't have made the decision if they just asked the question. If they'd asked like 10 people, they would have got the same answer probably from all 10 people, and it really would have made them pause before going forward. It's the same thing with our romantic engagements. We should be inviting people in to ask their thoughts on what we're doing and how we're doing it. If the goal is to have a long-lasting, happy marriage at the end. If the goal is just to get to the wedding, then go ahead. But after the wedding, you have to live with that person. All right? You have to live with what you've built, the habits that you have already made. Matthew 7, verse 24 says this, and we'll close out here. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't collapse, because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash. If you are a believer in Jesus and what he said, then you're someone that is trying to build each part of your life on his words. And this includes all of our relationships, romantic or otherwise. And it takes a lot of help to figure out how to build your relationship on that ancient rock in this day and age. It's not easy. We are living out such a different type of lifestyle than what we see in the Bible. Trying to figure out what that ancient wisdom is and how it applies to us today is not straightforward. It is hard, and furthermore, it's always changing. And so it takes a lot of work. And here's the other thing, it's not fast. Building these relationships isn't fast. It doesn't always gratify the moment. The communion message was exactly about this. The timing of things does not always satisfy emotionally. But if we trust in God's timing, it satisfies in the long run. If we build a healthy culture based in the wisdom of Jesus, we will have relationships that weather the storms and the floods that will one day come to assault your life, your family, and your marriage. Amen. Thank you very much.